Good day, and welcome to Dangerous Person 2.0 English channel. We are going to talk about a cold case. It is unsolved. At some point, this case was passed to Chief Inspector Norman Mackillop, who is our guest again. Good afternoon, Norman.
Good afternoon.
I would like to ask you about the case of Howard Barron. This was a murder. Occurred in 1972, December 31st, New Year's Eve, in Star House, which is in Tsim. If I recall properly, did you join the Hong Kong police by 1972?
No, I joined in 73.
Okay, so this is a case that gets passed to you. You're not the original
No.
inspector. Okay, so when you get this case, it's cold already?
It's 5 years cold.
It's 5 years cold. How did this case land on your lap, and who's Howard Barron?
Howard Barron is the victim of a homicide in 1972 at Star House, as you know. How did it come to me? It's just in a normal process of an unsolved cold case to review, try to come up with some fresh ideas, some fresh lines of inquiry. It's a normal procedure.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right. Howard Barron, like who is this guy? Who's he married to? What's his background? Where's he from?
He's an American, Howard Barron, from what I know from the file. He was a businessman who brokered deals. He had some background as a consultant in construction work, particularly for the Hilton Hotel.
Okay.
I believe he'd worked at some time in the PX, the American PX, the procurers for canteens and things of that nature. The Vietnam War was still raging at that time, 72. It was in the final throes.
Yes.
He hung about and held court, you could say, famously in the Peninsula Hotel.
Okay. Which is actually quite close to the scene of his
Yes.
death.
As we all know, in Hong Kong, it's a five-star hotel, world famous. But that's where he seemed to hold the majority of his business meetings.
Yeah. It was said he had a customary
Table. Yes.
in the lobby.
Yes. So he was quite a well-known character.
Okay. So it's New Year's Eve. He goes over to Star House, Tsim. He goes up to the 16th floor, I believe, and he's found later with a .38 revolver shot in the chest. There's two things, a couple of things that stick out. Now, before this happened, we see from the court judgment, A9031, 1993, at para 1 on page 3, that Howard had been told in July 1972, so this is 5 months before his death, by his doctor, Dr. Cary Hughes, that he had cancer, and he had 6 to 12 months to live. Fast forward 5 months, New Year's Eve, he's dead. How do we know this was not a suicide?
How do we know? Yeah. Well, he was dead. The post-mortem showed that he'd been shot by a .38 Smith & Wesson.
Yeah.
The door was unlocked. There was no Smith & Wesson.
Okay. So the weapon is missing.
Yes.
So that tells you right there someone else did it. Someone walked off with the gun.
Yeah.
It was said the bullet that was recovered was of a make unknown in Hong Kong.
No, I think that, as far as I know, that's not true. But it was a .38 special caliber, which is a little bit more powerful than the normal .38 calibers, which was unusual in Hong Kong at that time.
Okay.
But very common in the Philippines.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So now, coroner's jury held that homicide by person or persons unknown. The police believed he was murdered. There was no robbery. Okay, the murder occurred room 1603, Star House, and this was the office of Barron's friend, Steve Parker.
Yeah, quite a well-known man.
Okay. He was married to the famous actress Shirley MacLaine.
Yeah.
So Howard had connections also to Hollywood, evidenced by this. But first thing that comes to my mind was this is Steve Parker's office. Could he have been the intended victim?
it's possible, but Steve Parker was in Tokyo at the time.
Oh, he was in Tokyo at the time.
But whenever there's a celebrity murdered, someone of note, there's always lines of inquiry which are sometimes based on just rumor and some fantasy. So it's sometimes very difficult for an investigator to try and just focus on the facts, but don't get led off on tangents with rumors and who the person is, the fact that his best friend's married to Shirley MacLaine, all these kind of things.
Okay, that's just sensationalism. They'll pull you off.
Pull you off course.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that's what happened with the investigation. There was also another possible line of inquiry that the suicide issue, the insurance issue, which was looked into. Yeah. The officer in charge of the investigation at that time was very competent man.
Okay, was that Carol?
Carol. And Sammy Che, my chief inspector. Okay. I was not a chief inspector at the time, I was just a young inspector. He was in Homicide Bureau when I was reviewing the case, so he was a source for me to ask what really happened at the time.
Give us an idea how this works. When this cold case comes to you, you have all the notes of the previous officers.
The whole file.
Okay, and do you go and interview some of the suspects again, or you work off what's been handled over?
No, each case is different. If you spot, I have all the statements from the witnesses, and so if I spot a statement that maybe is could do with a bit more information, or maybe re-examine the witness, then I'll do that. If it seems to be full and complete, then I won't re-examine the witness. If I can spot some possible line of inquiry that was missed at the time, then I'll bring it to the attention of my senior officers and see if we can open up a new line of inquiry, that kind of thing.
Okay, now I just quoted a paragraph from a court judgment, and this judgment is 1993, this judgment that I quoted from. This murder occurred in 1972, so this is 21 years later, and this is actually a case brought by Howard's son.
Bruce Barron.
Bruce Barron. Do you know Bruce?
Yes. When I got the case for your review, Bruce came to see me several times when he was in town. And sometimes to ask us any progress, and sometimes to give me information. Okay. He was still very much involved in trying to get to the bottom of what happened to his father. I think he carried on for many, many years, if not even to this day.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So now this case, there's actually an insurance claim, I believe, or to see if the insurance was valid, because prior to Barron's death, he had met with another gentleman who sold insurance. Mr. Fredericks, who is very prominent in this judgment.
He's prominent in that judgment, but he was not so prominent in the initial investigation.
Okay.
Fredericks met Howard Barron around about 1969. He's an American, former lawyer, but came to Hong Kong as an insurance broker. And he met Howard Barron in 1969, and Barron took out a few policies with him. So he knew Barron. And then later on, some years later, he took out some personal accident insurance.
I read this judgment, and at one point, Bruce had called Mr. Frederick and said, "Is there a policy on my father?" And Frederick said no, and the judge pointed out that was untrue, because actually Howard had an accidental life insurance policy on him. He did not have a full life insurance. Well, actually, he did have a full life insurance policy on him, but he shouldn't have, because he had surgery before. Yeah. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I'm familiar with it, and I've only recently read this judgment. It was clear that Bruce, the son, had pursued the insurance matter as far as he could, probably at great expense to himself. Yeah. By that time, his mother was deceased, so he was insuring on behalf of the estate. Right.
Okay.
He was pursuing the matter on behalf of the estate.
Sure.
And to his credit, he'd been overturned, I believe, twice in the courts in Hong Kong, who said there's no merit in the case. And he appealed these cases. It must have cost them quite a lot in effort and money. Until finally he managed to get the case up to the High Court and got his hearing. Now that's the judgment that I had no access to when I was doing the cold case. This is many years later. But that, on reading that case, it really opens my eyes to other possibilities that were not examined at the time.
Okay.
And the deeds and actions of Mr. Fredericks come into the spotlight. But let's go back, rewind a little bit, if you don't mind, to the actual case. There's no suggestion it was other than murder.
Okay.
We did the Elizabeth Powell, who was a girlfriend of Bruce Barron.
Yes.
I re-interviewed her. She had nothing new to say, but I was quite impressed with her cooperation that she gave me. So
she was a hostess.
She was at that time. She was a hostess, topless hostess in the bar. But
she had nothing.
No. Despite being a hostess, she was actually quite respected amongst these bar people.
Okay.
There was no suspicion about she being in any way involved. And they were supposed to come together to
celebrate New Year's.
Yes, to celebrate New Year together at one of the bars. I also interviewed some people who had been in Howard Barron's business circles. And this was for the cold case, and there was some inference that he was refitting or rebuilding a fishing boat in the Philippines, possibly for smuggling, because there were so many compartments in the boat that it wasn't legit. It doesn't seem to be compatible with being a fishing boat.
Okay.
And I was told that boat sank. There was loss of life, and perhaps it was a revenge matter. But these kind of stories are very difficult to follow up. There's very difficult to a possible lead, but how to follow it up is very difficult. So all these things, and Bruce would come to see me, once every 2 or 3 times a year, to discuss these issues. But eventually, I didn't find anything of real value that I could follow up, which would bring some light to the case.
Did you ever find any reason, or was there the possibility that someone was out to get Howard? Was that?
There was many possibilities. He was involved in business. He didn't have a substantial office. He used when he used an office, he would use his friend Steve Parker's office. He was operating from the Peninsula Hotel. His office, his business life was not transparent. So there could have been many different reasons why. I just mentioned one, the fishing boat that sank. There could be many reasons why he might have some enemies. But nothing that was substantial, no leads that could actually be followed up to any conclusion. So his son was at one time apparently a suspect because he didn't have good relations with his father. Oh. But for me, having met Bruce Barron, no, I don't. No.
Okay. So there's a very open mind about who's possible suspects.
Oh, the press at that time were rife with rumors.
So the murder scene itself, I know you're not there. You get this report 5 years later, but from what you could tell, can you tell if it was premeditated or it was a heat of the moment? Was there a struggle?
No. It was very strange reading from the post-mortem reports. The gun was fired right into the chest. So it wasn't fired from a distance.
Okay, the barrel was on the chest.
The barrel was on the chest, and the forensic scientists could tell because of the burn marks that it was so close, not just powder marks, but burn marks, straight to the heart. Putting yourself in Howard Barron's shoes, so to speak,
Yeah.
with a gun. If it was, it would be very difficult. You would try to brush it aside or something. You wouldn't allow the gun to come right up to your chest and be fired. It would be kind of, no, human nature would try and get it. So I don't know, but it was point blank to the chest.
Does that suggest he knew?
I don't know. The office door was open. We had witness to say that he had said he'd got a phone call and he had to go to the office. Right.
Oh, okay.
Which is New Year's Eve, kind of unusual.
So he was called over there.
He says.
Okay. The witness says.
Yes. Okay. Well, the witness said that he said. So,
okay.
Yes.
So it's hearsay already.
Yes.
Okay.
So the room door was open. There was no sign in the office of any struggle. But of course, in these days, there was no CCTV.
Yeah.
So we all complain about the cameras everywhere, but there's good reason for it sometimes. So no CCTV. We couldn't track his movements. So we really don't know what happened in that office other than he was shot dead at point blank range. Okay. The gun was never found, of course.
Never found. And he had access to that office. He could easily go in.
Yes.
Okay, so that's just a mystery there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in these days, guns could be sneaked in through Kai Tak Airport because there was no metal detectors on the way in. We found that later through other cases of robberies. So it's quite easy to smuggle a gun into Hong Kong.
Okay, so you did mention before the bullets seem to be out and available in the Philippines. We have a fishing boat that's somehow tied to the Philippines.
Yes. So these are the kind of things that could lead us down the rabbit hole and forget the basics.
Okay. So what was the basics after you looked at the whole thing here? Because a lot unanswered.
There was no basics. But one thing that struck me, only when I read this judgment, and don't forget the judge was judging on an insurance case. He wasn't looking into the murder.
Yes.
Right. Now, the person in charge of Homicide Bureau at that time was a person called Taff Hunt. Taff Hunt was a notoriously corrupt police officer who was jailed during the 𝐒𝐫𝐢𝐷 era. He was good friends with 𝐒𝐿𝐵, and he was jailed.
Okay.
But his theory was that Howard Barron had commissioned his own murder. In other words, it was an assisted suicide. Yes. Okay. That was his theory. Of course, that was discounted, right? Because at the time, from the evidence I can see from the file, is that the insurance agent said that Howard Barron was uninsurable, so there was no policy. Howard Barron himself had said on many occasions he was uninsurable.
Yes.
Howard Barron made no secret of his cancer and the other operations and life-threatening diseases that he had.
Yeah.
So that theory was discounted until I read this judgment that you gave to me.
Yes.
I read it yesterday, and it's very, very interesting indeed. This is 1993.
Yes.
After Bruce Barron had tried many times to raise the issue in court of possible negligence or misinformation by the insurance company and or the agent, Frederick, the agent, who, as I mentioned earlier, was could say loosely a friend at that time, known him in '69. Okay. Had actually arranged the insurance policy for personal accident.
Yes.
But when the case came before Judge Seagood in the High Court, the insurance issue, reading that judgment was quite a revelation, and brought to mind again the theory of Taff Hunt, that this may well have been a commissioned suicide. Now, why I say this is because Fredericks was attacked several times in the judgment by the judge.
Yes.
Quite severely.
Yes.
In fact, he says he's lying on several occasions on a very key issue. there was indeed a policy taken out by Barron, right, which was
Through Frederick.
through Frederick,
Yeah.
which was a personal accident policy.
Yes.
But there was an exclusion in that original policy for murder.
Yes.
So if there was a personal accident leading to death, yes. But if murder led to death, no.
Right.
No insurance. That was changed. And the reason and who was responsible for the change is a little bit smoky. Even Judge 𝐒𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐿 couldn't get to the real heart of the matter. But importantly, he rules that Frederick lied on several occasions.
Yes.
He lied to the Inspector Carroll, who interviewed him,
Yep.
by saying that Barron's was uninsurable. So basically, forget this theory about he's arranged for his killing, etc., for the insurance policy. He lied to the court.
Yes.
He came up with two different versions for the court.
Right. And when confronted, he said he was mistaken. The judge didn't buy that.
No. And one of the important aspects in the declaration for the original insurance policy in 1971, he wrote the declaration which concerns diseases or operations that you've had, and the answer is no.
Yeah. He filled out every box,
He filled out the boxes.
Yes.
Barron had already said, I'm uninsurable, and that's from several witnesses. But then the policy is taken out with the declaration signed by Barron that he's had no previous illnesses or any consequences. But that declaration was written by Fredericks.
Yes.
So 𝐒𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐿 came to a conclusion that either Fredericks fraudulently wrote that declaration,
Yes.
or he did so in collusion with Barron. But unfortunately, on the balance of probabilities, he couldn't, although no matter what he thought. But then there was another issue which arose a year later, when Fredericks gave evidence that the actual insurance policy was null and void, because Barron had not paid up his policy, so it was null and void.
And
No, that's not true.
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
The policy wasn't null and void. There was a check returned to Barron, which was later by the evidence of the senior man in the insurance company saying it could have been the credit for a change in the policy.
Okay.
So that policy is null and void, but it's not because you're not paying it. There's a new policy, but there was a new clause in the policy. And that new clause included the clause for murder. So murder was insurable.
Okay, so now the new clause says murder is insurable.
It's insurable, yeah.
Okay.
There's no exclusion clause for murder.
Okay.
And the only issue was if the exclusion clause would apply if that murder was a result of some illegal act by the victim of the murder or something of that nature.
Sure. Yeah.
So there was some discussion about that. Now Fredericks, as the agent for Barron, not for the insurance company, would have been informed of these additions, exclusions, or
the new policy.
He would have been informed.
Yeah. So his comment that it wasn't paid up,
There was
again, is untrue and
the evidence
inconsistent with the evidence.
No, inconsistent with the evidence.
So we have this guy, Fredericks, really going out of his way on multiple occasions. He even lied to Bruce. I'll say that. He lied to Bruce.
Yeah,
Bruce called and said, was there insurance? He said no.
Yes.
So...
And Bruce, that's the reason why Bruce Barron took out the lawsuit. Because he stated that he had been misinformed by the insurance company and or Fredericks when he called naturally after his father's death, and his mother too, had been told that there was no insurance, which was he should have known at that time very clearly that there was insurance.
Yeah. So what
But
the heck is
he
going
missed it.
out here? Why not just pay the insurance?
But you have to consider this, which is, to me, is a very crucial point. But a crucial point that the judge, remember, the judge is focusing on whether or not there was insurance.
Right.
Whether or not the defendants, who are the insurance company and Fredericks, should have informed Bruce that there was insurance. So they misinformed him, then therefore they're liable to pay the insurance, etc. But another crucial issue on the insurance policy is that the policy could not have been, no matter whether there was a new murder clause allowing murder, the underlying fact is that there had been fraud on the policy. The insurance company would never have insured Howard Barron if they knew that he had these illnesses.
Yes.
And he only had 6 months to live. So Bruce, unfortunately, was not able to claim on the insurance policy. He was able to get back all his expenses. It's rather unusual. So he's able to claim back all his legal expenses, but he was not, unfortunately, able to claim on the policy. But Fredericks was found to be lying on several occasions.
Yeah.
It was quite clear that lying to such a way, being a very, very experienced insurance broker
And a lawyer.
and a lawyer, he knew what he was doing. But why? Was it to get a commission on a fairly minor policy, which would be really not that much money? As long as the policy was in force, then he would get a commission. You understand? But is that a reason for such a person to lie to an insurance company?
It shouldn't be.
Then
For a normal person, no.
no.
But,
So what else is going on?
Is there any somehow he can tap into the insurance? Is never paid out.
No, it was never paid out. But I asked myself as an investigator, why would such a person, with the knowledge of Bruce Barron, Howard Barron, who signed the document, but the document was actually filled in by Fredericks.
Yeah.
So, as the judge said, either they were colluding together, or
Fredericks
Fredericks
is committing fraud
was
here.
committing fraud.
Yeah.
My own view, it's more likely that they were colluding together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who's the beneficiary of the insurance?
The beneficiary
Yeah.
would be the immediate kin,
So that would be the wife and
the wife and son. Yes,
Okay, and Bruce.
wife and son.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So Fredericks is the one actually trying to prevent any insurance be paid out to these two beneficiaries. So and then we go to the court, and the court will not.
Let's put it this way: if at the time, and I'm not making accusations against him, Fredericks, but if at the time, for example, Bruce Barron knew he was going to die, we have evidence of that from several sources.
Okay.
He knew he had very little money, right?
Okay.
He was not a rich man.
Okay.
He wanted to give his family something. He knew he was legally uninsurable.
So he would work with.
Yes. Now, what's the benefit of Frederick for that? To collude with someone of that nature,
Doesn't seem
to provide them with cover, which he knew might not be able to pick up because the form was filled in
fraudulently.
wrongly or fraudulently, it doesn't matter. There was a declaration that there was no illness. But the policy had been changed to include murder, which I find there's no coincidences in these cases.
So that was deliberate.
I would suggest that there's a good case that was deliberate. In the mind of Bruce Barron thought possibly he could get coverage for his wife and son in the event that he was murdered. So to me, that's a good case for looking or opening up the possibility that this was murder by commission. I'm not suggesting Fredericks was the murderer.
Yeah. Basically, let's say I'm Howard.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure my kid and wife get something.
Yeah.
I'm going to basically work with Fredericks. I'm going to give you some money. You're going to get some money on commission for this insurance policy. It's no skin off your back. Just do it in this way.
Possibility.
And then,
this judgment by Judge 𝐒𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐿
yeah.
certainly opens up the possibility and worth investigating.
Okay.
These facts were not known at the time.
Okay, when you had that case, when were you, this is 1993, so when were you off this case? When did you?
Oh, 1993, I was in the narcotics bureau. I was long gone from...
From homicide. Okay, all right. So what else jumps out? Anything else jump out at you from this case?
Only this...
This insurance thing that you did not know about before.
No, to me that's a key piece of new information, which is worthy of following up, and following up in the theory that this was a murder by commission. We might not be able to find the murderer, because it could be a hired gunman. There's indications that's the case because of the weapon, which wasn't common in Hong Kong at that time.
Okay.
And the caliber of the bullet. It's more common in the Philippines. The insurance issue was kind of brushed aside. It became quite prominent for a while, until Carroll was told, Inspector, no, he was uninsurable. And all the witnesses said Howard Barnsley was uninsurable, so the insurance issue wasn't followed up to the proper degree that it should have been. Not criticizing the police at the time.
Yeah, but actually, whoever told Carroll that is actually breaking the law. He's interfering with an investigation by giving him false information.
Could be.
It's obstructing an investigation.
Yeah.
So
the judge, 𝐒𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐿, recognized that at that time when he was being interviewed by Inspector Carroll, he knew that there was coverage.
So Fredericks should have gotten something more than a slap on the hands. He's basically deceiving everyone about this.
It appears so, and that seems to be the judgment of Judge 𝐒𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐿.
I see.
So if I knew that at the time of the cold case review, that would have been my focus.
You would have been wanting to speak to Mr. Fredericks.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
So it's still a cold case.
Yes.
Right now.
And this aspect is still worthy of investigation. So there you go. You gave me this today, and you've sparked off a possible good line of inquiry.
Great. So you're
not from me.
From those who follow you in the force.
No, no.
For the present inspectors in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Anything else you can add to this, Norman?
No. To me, that's the most significant piece of information that's come up.
Okay. So
for a long time.
Let's take a closer look at it. I'll take a closer look at it myself. I just did a quick read through. I didn't get as much as you got out of it, so I'll go back to it.
I'm pretty impressed with Judge 𝐒𝐫𝐤𝐿𝐥𝐿.
Yeah, okay.
A trained analytical mind looking into the fine details.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Which were missed in the murder inquiry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So this sounds like a cold case that should be looked at again in conjunction with this judgment.
Yes.
That could put it on the right path.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you again, Norman, for your time, your insight, your experience. Yes. Thank you very much. Again, Dangerous Person 2.0 English channel. If you like this, please subscribe, thumbs up, share, and comment. And in this instant, we have an unsolved case. If anyone has any information, please send an email to starhousemurder@gmail.com, and we'll get it to the authorities. Thank you very much.
We received a message from one of our audience who watched our Chinese channel with regard to the Star House case.
I watched your YouTube video on Dangerous People 2.0 and heard the story about Star House. I really want to share with you that in 2007, we were working on the fire protection system at Star House, and we found a gun inside one of the vertical multi-level pipes. At that time, we were busy with our project at Star House and didn't want to cause any trouble, so we disposed of it. Now, hearing you talk about the case, I realized that the gun must have been a murder weapon. It was discovered by my colleague, and we didn't know what kind of gun it was. There were bullets in it, and it must have been left in that pipe for many years. At that time we really didn't think it was that serious, and now I deeply regret not reporting it to the police. Upon further inquiry, we were informed that the gun was found inside a pipe on the 3rd floor of Star House. No picture was taken for records.